The shutter speed that we select can be an important creative tool. There's going to be quite a few occasions when adding a little movement to our subject can really make a picture. Now, most of the time with creative movement, but not all of the time, we're going to want a large part of the image sharp, so it's reasonable to assume we're going to be working from a tripod most of the time. This particular image was taken so late in the evening, it's just that light in the sky reflecting off the water that's giving us any light at all. If we could turn around and look behind us, it would be almost completely dark. Hence the 8-second shutter speed used here at f/22. In my next shot, I've used movement in the subject as a creative tool, but there is a little bit of a risk here of camera shake too, but I think I've got away with it because there doesn't seem to be a great deal of evidence of that. It was shot through a large glass tube that ran through an aquarium, so I have water movement here and people walking through the tube, probably a few fish too. The shot was handheld with a 135mm lens, 30th of a second at f8. The problem with the movement technique in any photograph is that we could write a book about all the different creative ideas that are possible, and I'm sure some people have done so. One of our greatest assets these days is being able to look back to the settings we used, being able to view the effect and then refresh our memory on what we did. It helps us to form a correlation between the two, raises our awareness. Here, as you can see, a tripod was used along with a 4-second shutter speed to capture the water tumbling down over the rocks. But there's a little bit of an added bonus here, which wasn't planned for. The slow speed was also enough to capture a little bit of spraying the air around the water, adding just a little atmosphere to the picture. However, when you're in these situations, vary your shutter speed, especially if your camera is on a tripod. All the slow speeds are likely to be available to you, so don't just settle on one speed, try a few different ones. With my fisherman on a beach here, 1/4 of a second was all that was required to just add that little bit of movement to the surf. But then again, the surf is almost running left to right, so speed relative to me is a little different. It's quite a bit less than the 4 seconds of the previous seascape. In this shot, the movement was easy to achieve because of the volume and speed of it. The river was in serious flood, although the water is coming towards us, which tends to lessen its speed relative to me. But there's still bags of movement created with a 1-second exposure. This image was shot by a friend of mine, Rick Sherwin. It's a very creative use of shutter speed to create movement and interest within the image. And it's done on a subject that we usually expect to see pin sharp. So a long telephoto lens was used. In fact, he appears to have the same lens that I do, Canon 100-400 set at 400mm. But Rick has deliberately reduced the shutter to a 40th of a second and panned along with the surfer. Now, he knew movement would be created, and while the effect can't be exactly predictable, he shortened the odds quite a bit by selecting just the right shutter speed. Sometimes, of course, we do get lucky, and here we've managed to capture both sharpness and movement in our subject. Now, while we can't easily plan for something like this, we certainly can make a calculated guess. A 5/100th of a second shutter speed is not super fast if we're looking to freeze wing beats, but it's certainly enough to capture the body, head, beak and eye perfectly sharp. In this shot of a rainbow bee-eater, it needed to be critically sharp, and I guess I must have took quite a few hundred shots of this bird as it flew from a wire fence, caught an insect in flight, and returned to the wire. A 400mm lens was used, but I also had a 1.4 multiplier, or extender as some people call them, which extends the focal length to 560mm. 0.02 of a second at f8, and f8 is actually wide open once the multiplier is added to this lens. Now I can't really claim that the movement here was created, but also the image is not a failure. Now these birds are quite small and the wings beat extremely fast. I think the sharpness in the shot is acceptable in all but the tips of the wings, which are moving faster than anything else. So in these conditions, and with the benefit of hindsight, perhaps if I had increased the ISO to 800, I would then have been able to set a shutter speed of 0.004 of a second, and I may have been able to freeze even the wingtips of that bird. I suppose a question we might ask is, what speed do we need to use for what? But that really is a difficult question to answer. The wing beats of this small bee-eater are going to be completely different, for example, to something like this fish eagle. The movement of water is always going to be somewhat different in speed and in direction. It can be moving towards us, or it can be going left to right, right to left. Wing beats, fast or slow. The car speed can be very quick but coming towards us, and it doesn't seem quite so fast as it would if we were shooting the same car from the side. All of these make quite a difference, and that's going to vary the shutter speed we may require. If the subject and conditions allow it, why not take a variety of shots at different shutter speeds? You can always zoom into one of them on the LCD on the back of the camera, and perhaps look at the part where you're trying to introduce movement, just to get things right. Now, given time, you will find that a judgment does build up, which allows us to get it right more often than we don't.